One of the benefits of my job is that all my friends, my comrades, listeners of the podcast, they could send me emails, they could send me text messages, they could send me WhatsApp messages with their thoughts, their questions, their comments, their insights on the Parsha. And that gives me all sorts of different angles and perspectives. And one of my friends, my friend Brian, sent me a very interesting question that I'm going to use as a launch pad for the first segment of this week's Parsha podcast. You see, our Parsha begins with the beautiful captive. And it's a bit of a scandal. You go out to war, and who are the warriors? These are righteous Jews, great sages. And you meet a beautiful captive. A Jewish warrior, a righteous Jewish warrior is being seduced by an enemy captive. And the Torah outlines a very unique, very truly unprecedented process. We have an enemy combatant. And she's trying to knock you off your game and disrupt your ability to conduct this war. And she's so beautiful and so seductive. And the man is stricken. And he wants her and he desires her. And the Torah outlines the process where he can marry her, be with her. But only after there is this process to make his desire a bit less appealing. He's in war, and his testosterone is pulsing within him, and he sees this beautiful, seductive captive, and he's so stricken by her, so taken by her, he wants to marry her. And the Torah is assessing that, this experience may be tampering with his judgment. Is this really a good idea? Is it a good idea to marry her? She comes from a very different culture and society and religion and people. She comes from idolaters. She is part of an enemy people, sworn enemies of our people. But this is a healthy man, and it's during wartime, and he may be not quite thinking straight. He may be a bit irrational, and he's being seduced. And he can't resist the allure. And the Torah does not say, be a man, overcome this desire. No. The Torah is outlining a way by which he can marry her. And Rashi, of course, tells us that the Torah is only speaking in opposition to the tzaraas. And the Torah knows that if this was forbidden, if there's no way to allow it in some fashion via some process, he will not be able to resist, and he will marry her in violation of the Torah. This battle with his desires, with his inclinations, with his tzaraas, it's an unwinnable battle. And we don't fight such battles. And therefore she must be permitted to him. But let's try to even the playing field. Balance things out. She's so beautiful, and she is so desirable, and he is consumed with war, so he's got the testosterone off the charts. Let's try to even the playing field. Balance things out. In his difficulty, in his challenge, in his test, the tzaraas is completely outmatching and outclassing his Yetzer Tov. It's asymmetric warfare. Says the Torah, let him wait. Wait a month. And she has all this beautiful, provocative, seductive clothing. Let's switch those clothing. And she's so appealing, so gorgeous. Let's let the hair and makeup be diminished. Let's remove the filters. And after a month, well, it's not so exciting. It's not so new. Maybe she's not that beautiful. And she's complaining. And maybe the Jewish man can come to the realization, maybe he could do better. But if, after a month of reassessment, if he's still infatuated and enthralled and taken by her, well then okay, then it's an unwinnable battle, truly, and he's allowed to marry her. That's how our Parsha starts off. And of course, this narrative and this law of the beautiful captive woman, it's fascinating for all sorts of reasons. Chief among them is this idea that Rashi tells us that the purpose of the Torah is to overcome the tzaraas. And here we have an impossible task. If the Torah forbids this woman completely, well, he'll do it anyhow. There's no way to win. And therefore, when there is an impossible task, when there is an unwinnable battle, the Torah doesn't give you that task. If there is no way to fully overcome this challenge, well, then it's not given to you. The Torah must permit it. This is a big insight because we can infer from this that everything that the Torah does indeed demand of us, well then, it is doable. It is not an impossible task. It is indeed fulfillable. And of course, the Torah demands a lot of us. And it's not always easy. It may be quite hard. It may require great strength of character. But it is doable. And my friend Brian texted me, and he says, "What's up with the nails?" Part of this month-long process of trying to even the playing field is that she must let her nails grow out. The nails, they're not trimmed and tidy and manicured. She has to let her nails grow out. Is that really going to change the calculus for anyone? She's so beautiful and so desirable and so seductive, but her nails are a bit overgrown. Does that really change the calculus for this Jewish warrior? And Brian texts me, he's like, well, fingernails grow around 3 millimeters each month. So by her not cutting her nails for a month, is that really going to change anything? What an interesting perspective that my friend Brian sent my way. How do you answer this question? Truth is, I never really focused on it. But it is kind of interesting. The Torah tells us she has to let her nails grow for a month. So initially I said to Brian, well, listen, when your nails grow out and maybe they get a little dirt under it, that's not as nice. And I told him, you feel unclean and unkempt when you go a couple of weeks without cutting your nails. But then I suggested something interesting, something maybe deep and deeper that we can speculate. The Talmud tells us that our fingernails and our toenails as well, they're vestiges from humanity prior to the sin of Adam. The Talmud tells us that prior to Adam's sin, he was made entirely of fingernail material. And when he sinned, he lost it. That translucent, super cool body armor of a fingernail material, it disappeared. And he was vulnerable, and he was naked, and he was exposed, and he was sad and depressed, and it was dark. And after Shabbos, he sinned on Friday. After Shabbos, it's dark. And he invents fire. And he's examining his body, and he's freaking out that he lost all this protection. He lost his fingernail material. And then he finds a little bit on the tips of his finger. A little bit remains. And he sees it in the fire. And he has a modicum of comfort. A little bit of my Kevlar, my protection that I had before the sin still remains. And of course, as you know, during the Havdalah ceremony that we do to mark the end of Shabbos, part of the ceremony is to light the torch, to light the candle, and to look in its light at your fingernails. And that's simulating what Adam did. So fingernails are very important, very lofty, and replete and pregnant with meaning. So maybe, just maybe, we can speculate. The fact that she must allow her nails to grow. Part of this process of this man, he sees the beautiful captive woman and he wants her and he desires her, and the tzaraas is so strong And the Torah is trying to kind of balance things out. Give him a chance to maybe see things more clearly and to maybe overcome this desire. Let the nails grow out. Remember your glorious past. Remember your glorious, untainted self that you had before the sin of Adam. There's something that resembles you, the primordial Adam, that was in paradise, that was free of the evil inclination, that was so lofty that the angels mistook him for God. And maybe when he witnesses her nails grow out, and he maybe thinks in his head about nails and what they indicate, what they represent, what they symbolize, maybe that will inspire him to act in a way more in line, more resembling Adam before his sin. When the person sees the beautiful captive woman, it's the tzaraas that's arousing him to be desirous. Well, there was once a time humanity was once towering and was once superseding the tzaraas, overcoming the tzaraas. And when he sees that towering bit of humanity that he once had, and truthfully she once had, maybe he's objectifying her as a plaything to be used for his carnal pleasure, and now her nails being grown out, well, maybe that reminds him of the loftier and grander and more prestigious and august origins of humanity. And maybe this serves to weaken his more base and carnal and impulsive desires. Looking at the nails, letting the nail grow out. Maybe that's a way to remember our transcendental origins. And maybe this can have a chilling effect on the base carnal instincts that we now suffer from as a result of Adam's sin. In the state of fingernails, we were not dominated by the tzaraas. Adam, before his sin, when he's completely fingernail material, the sole impulse for sin is external. It's the serpent. That's our origin. That's our destiny. And remembering that and ruminating upon that and maybe spending a month thinking about that, that can help us readjust, or can help this warrior man readjust and recalibrate his impulses, and giving him a shot, a chance, an opportunity to perhaps overcome his impulses and his instincts that are born out of the tzaraas that is coursing within him. Very interesting idea, maybe a deep idea. On the very first part of our Parsha, of course, is loaded with all sorts of very interesting subjects and mitzvos, and just some speculation. And we thank our friend Brian for raising this question. Segment number 1 is over. Let's go to segment number 2, a heartening insight for parents struggling with recalcitrant, with unruly, with disobedient, with unmanageable children. Immediately after the episode of the beautiful, seductive, captive woman in wartime, we read about a shocking episode of capital punishment. Capital punishment is when we execute someone for their crimes. And it is reserved, you would imagine, for the worst criminals, for the most unconscionable, most egregious, most heinous of crimes. And that's true. But it's also given to the wayward and rebellious son. A kid, a lad, an adolescent. And what exactly were his crimes? Well, he stole money from dad. And he bought a certain amount of wine and a certain amount of meat, and he ate it in bad company. If he does that twice, in 3 months, from the ages of 13 to the ages of 13 and 3 months, he is a ben sorer umore, a wayward and rebellious son, and he is executed, the Torah tells us, in a Jewish court of law. What did he do already? He stole, not great, but not the worst crime in the world. Bought meat and wine and ate it in bad company. How can we possibly rationalize execution, capital punishment, for such a seemingly trivial crime? Listen, this is a juvenile delinquent, not a great kid, maybe behaving in a problematic fashion, stealing, hanging out bad company, developing a dependency for meat and wine. This is not a child heading in a very good trajectory. So what do you do about it? Well, we would say, got to give him some tough love, maybe send him to the juvie, military school, SSRIs, Ritalin. Maybe that will help. Some cognitive behavioral therapy, social work. Or buy him a puppy, get him a PlayStation, have him go to the gym, or dig ditches. These are some of the ideas that we would have for what to do with this problematic boy. But execution, really? Seems like an overly harsh, an overly excessive punishment for a comparatively minor crime. Now, the Talmud tells us just how many people were actually executed for this. Talmud tells us, Ben Sorer Umoreh, the wayward and rebellious son, the boy at a very specific age in his development, steals money from his parents, goes and buys meat and wine, eats in bad company, and is warned and so on, and gets executed. Never happened and never will happen. The amount of boys who have been executed in history for this crime is exactly 0. And therefore the Talmud tells us, wait, if so, the Torah could have shaved off a few verses. Our Parsha could have been a bit shorter. I spent many months of my life studying the book of Talmud, or the chapter in Talmud that talks about the Ben Sorer Umoreh, chapter 8 of the book of Sanhedrin. The chapter is titled Ben Sorer Umoreh, the wayward and rebellious sons. I could have spent the time doing something else, learning CPR, getting a GED. We could have used the time for other things. If it never happened, never will happen, why is it written? Asks the Talmud. The Talmud answers, study it and your reward. The Talmud's telling us there's something really rewarding about this law, about the Ben Sorer Umoreh, about the wayward and rebellious son. Study it and your reward. Now, as someone who spent many months studying the laws of Ben Sorer Umoreh and the chapter of Ben Sorer Umoreh, I will tell you it's a very rewarding chapter. It's a very deep and very profound and very insightful. One of the most delightful Torah experiences that I ever had in my life was studying the book of Sanhedrin and specifically the chapter of Ben Sorer Umoreh. In fact, I wrote a little book about it in Hebrew. It's available on my website, rabbiwolbe.com. In the bio, there's a link if you want to read it. It is in Hebrew, though. I am warning you. But it's very rewarding. But I want to give you maybe another idea, speculate for you, maybe a rewarding insight about the Ben Sorer Umoreh, the wayward and rebellious son. The Talmud, in the aforementioned chapter of Ben Sorer Umoreh on the book of Sanhedrin, in page 72a, the Talmud asks our question. This seems like it's an excessive punishment for a comparatively minor crime. Because this guy ate a certain amount of meat and drank a half a load of Italian wine, that's a good reason to have them executed. Why is the Ben Sorer Umoreh? Why is the law telling us that for this crime, stealing, eating meat, wine, why is this an executable offense? Says the Talmud, the Torah is able to play out the future behavior of this adolescent. If a boy at this particular age does this particular constellation of behaviors, And the Talmud actually lists many, many more different behaviors, different criteria that must be checked, must be fulfilled in order for them to be labeled, to be classified as a ben sorah umoreh. But if all these factors are checked, the Talmud is telling us that the Torah is predicting with 100% accuracy that he'll develop a taste for the meat and the wine, develop a dependency upon it, and will be addicted to it, and will continuously steal all of his dad's money to feed, to fund his dependency until the dad's broke. And the dependency will continue. And then this boy, this now older boy, is going to go to a crossroads and start to live as a bandit and steal in order to feed his desires. And eventually, this boy will come to be a murderer. And this boy eventually, when this boy will mature and become a man, they'll be captured and arrested for the crime of murder. And they will be executed in a Jewish court of law as a murderer. And the Torah is predicting this with 100% certainty. Therefore, says the Torah, let them die innocent and not die guilty. This boy is on a path, on a trajectory where they're going to be executed in a Jewish court of law for certain. And therefore, let's execute them now when they are sinless, as opposed to executing them in a few years for terrible, awful, heinous, grievous crimes that they are destined to commit. They're going to be executed anyhow. Let them execute an innocent person and not a guilty person. That is the rationale that the Talmud tells us as to why the ben sorah umoreh is executed in a Jewish court of law. And the Talmud elaborates that when a wicked person is executed, it's actually for their benefit, because then they do no more sins, and so on. Very interesting Talmud in the very top of page 72a in the book of Sanhedrin. What the Talmud's telling us, very fascinating, listen very carefully. This child, this adolescent, this boy, this ben sorah umoreh, with this very specific set of attributes at a very specific age, does very specific things, that steals the money and buys the meat and buys the wine and eats in bad company. And there are many, many other factors that the Talmud enumerates. This is a guaranteed path that can only end up with their execution. This child is irreparable, is unsalvageable, is doomed to be executed in a Jewish court of law, and therefore it's better to execute them when they're innocent rather than when they're guilty. This child, again, with this very specific set of characteristics, is destined for a life of crime, to become a criminal, and to be executed for terrible crimes. Like Minority Report, which is a movie that I never watched, but I understand it is a way to tell about the future events that's going to happen. Criminals, execute them or punish them before they even do it. Okay, you've seen the movie, I'm sure. The ben sorah umoreh is definitely going to become a criminal who will be executed in a Jewish court of law. Execute them now in order to spare them from being executed for a real terrible crime. That's the rationale for the ben sorah umoreh. But again, the Talmud says it never happened and it never will happen. A ben sorah umoreh is an impossibility. And we study it and we get reward. What's the reward? I'll tell you what the reward is. If a child who is unsalvageable is an impossibility, we can infer that every single child, no matter how crazy, how unmanageable, how wild, how outrageously problematic, every single child is salvageable, can be saved, can be mended, can be remedied, can be restored to proper behavior. That's the reward. The reason why the ben sorah umoreh, hypothetically, is executed because they're destined to become a criminal who'll be executed anyhow. Kill them when they're innocent, not when they're guilty. But that never happened. And it never will happen. Do you know why it never happened and never will happen? Because it's not a possibility that a child is beyond repair. No child left behind means literally every single child can be reached, can be touched, can be redirected, can be restored to good behavior. This is a very heartening insight because I've heard some rumors. I've heard rumors that not every kid is obedient and follows rules and is well behaved. I've heard these rumors, these legends of tough kids, hard to deal with kids, recalcitrant kids who don't follow instructions, who don't perform as is expected, don't toe the line, misbehave. I've heard such rumors. Maybe it's true. I have no personal experience, of course. I cannot testify to the truth of that assessment, but that's what I've heard. What can I say? We have a heartening insight in our Parsha. The wayward and rebellious son is someone who is unsalvageable, but that never happened and never will happen. And the reason why we're taught about it is because it's rewarding. And now we know the reward. Or at least part of the reward. The Talmud promises us a reward. There's going to be a lot of reward in it. If you've ever had the great privilege of studying that book of Talmud and that chapter in Talmud, you know how rewarding it is to just study it. Even if it never happened, never will happen. But now we know another bit of reward. No child is a ben sora umora. No child is destined to a life of crime. No child is unsalvageable. And this brings us to segment number 3 of this week's Parsha podcast. Recorded in Houston, Texas by yours truly, Yaakov Wolbe, Rabbi Wolbe@gmail.com. In our Parsha, amongst the motley mix of different subjects addressed, amongst the panoply of mitzvos addressed, we read about a certain animal that is disqualified from being brought as a sacrifice. So, of course, you have the blemished animal's missing a leg, it's missing an eye, it's got its ear chopped off. All sorts of blemishes would disqualify an animal. You don't bring an animal like that to the temple. But there's another type of animal that's perfectly healthy, but it cannot be brought to the temple because of what its past history is. It's healthy, it's robust, you would imagine if you just look at it, it's perfectly suited for a sacrifice, but it's tainted because of the commerce done with it. The verse tells us, chapter 23, verse 19, Lo savi esnan zona. Don't bring a harlot's fee. A harlot. A woman of ill repute. She got paid for her services with a lamb, with a sheep. And now she wants to bring that sheep, that lamb, to the temple as a sacrifice. That animal is disqualified because of its history. Umechir kelev, or if someone swaps a dog for a sheep, that sheep that was swapped for the dog cannot be brought to the temple as a sacrifice. It's a disgrace for God. A very interesting mitzvah in our Parsha. Animals healthy, animals seems like it's perfectly suited for a sacrifice. It looks exactly like all the other animals that are brought as sacrifices, but because it was used to pay the harlot or it was exchanged for a dog, it's not a good animal to be brought for the purposes of a sacrifice in the temple. That's the mitzvah in our Parsha. Now, what's wrong with it? Why is such an animal disqualified? So the commentaries, of course, talk about it. And I want to cite an amazing explanation in the Ramban. The Ramban says that the harlots, the prostitutes, they want to do mitzvos with their fees. because they want to atone for their misdeeds. They want to whitewash their sin. And therefore the Torah prohibits a harlot's fee from being brought to the temple, because if it's accepted, then they think, oh, I'm free and clear. All those sins have been cleansed and removed and expunged. I could go back to do that again. And then I'll live a very sinful life. And every week I'll take one of my sheep that was used as a fee and cleanse myself. And therefore Torah prohibits it. And similarly, he tells us that the dogs, they were used to help the hunters and to help the city guardsmen, and they would raise these ferocious pit bulls who would harm the masses, people who needed it for their hunting, or they would need it for their role as guardians of the city, that have these really ferocious animals, and they would harm innocent people, and you'd feel bad because after all, you harmed the innocent people. So you know what I'll do? I'll swap the dog out, and I'll get a sheep, and I'll bring it to the temple, and I'll receive atonement for the history of this animal and this behavior, and then I can continue doing what I want to do, because after all, I brought the sacrifice, I brought to the temple, I've been expiated. That's the Ramban's explanation for why these two types of animals, the Esnan, Zona, and Mechir Kel, of the harlot's fee and the sheep that's exchanged for a dog, are prohibited to be brought into the temple as sacrifices. Very sharp reading and interpretation and explanation. We have the harlot. She has a guilty conscience about her profession, about her behavior. She knows it's grossly inappropriate. She knows that she is defiling herself and degrading her dignity. She knows that it's a sin. It's an affront to God, and she feels bad about it. And she wants to clean her conscience. She wants to whitewash her behavior. Bring a sacrifice. I'll do a mitzvah. I'll submit an offering to God, and all the sin will melt away. All the sins will be cleansed. The Ramban's telling us very deep reading into her behavior. This sacrifice, why is she bringing a sacrifice? It's being brought to use to cleanse her conscience, and instead of improving her spiritual standing, it'll actually encourage further sinfulness. The mafioso, who terrorizes the neighborhood, who demands protection money, takes the money and takes part of it and funds a soup kitchen, and all the guilt melts away. And some might think, well, this is kindness, this is righteousness, you're feeding the needy. Actually, no, that conscience cleanser is ultimately going to bring about more sinfulness. And therefore, animals that were exchanged for a harlot's services or for the dog are unwelcomed in the temple. It seems like it's a mitzvah, but actually it's not going to lead to more righteousness. It will lead to more sinfulness. Anything that's used for sinful behavior cannot be repurposed and refashioned and reconditioned into a mitzvah, because actually it's not going to lead to more righteousness. It will lead to more objectionable behavior. Very interesting comment in the Ramban. I think a very deep reading into human psychology. And I want to compare this to another idea, another mitzvah in our Parsha, and maybe develop a theme. That was in chapter 23 of our Parsha. Chapter 24, we read in verses 8 and 9, to be very careful to guard an affliction of tzaraas, guard it very, very much, and follow the rulings of the Kohanim, the Levites. Follow what they say. Guard and observe what they tell you to do. That's verse 8 of chapter 24 of our Parsha. And verse 9, Zechar, remember that Hashem, your God, did to Miriam, Baderach, on the way, B'tzeischem, Mitzrayim, when you left Egypt. What is this requirement to guard the affliction of tzaraas and to remember what Hashem did to Miriam? So, of course, Rashi tells us, What does it mean to be very careful and guard the affliction of tzaraas? Don't pluck it off. Tzaraas, of course, it's a skin malady that is a physical representation of a spiritual flaw. So if you have some growth on your hand, on your arm, on your skin somewhere, it's a discoloration, it's a growth, you could pluck it. You could take a scalpel and cut it off. You could excise it. Don't do that. Instead, go to the Kohen. Follow the procedure outlined in the book of Vayikra, Parshas Tazria Metzora. Follow the rules of tzaraas. Continues the verse, remember what Hashem did to Miriam. Miriam got tzaraas. Why did she get tzaraas? She didn't spend too much time in the sun. She didn't not put enough lotion on her skin. She got tzaraas because she spoke negatively about her brother Moshe. She spoke lashon hara, evil talk about Moshe. Very deep idea here. A person has tzaraas. You have a skin ailment, a skin discoloration. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to deal with this problem that you've encountered? So there's an impulse to just excise it, cut off the wart, move on. If you call the Kohen, that's a hassle. The Kohen has to inspect it, may quarantine you for 7 days. He may declare it's impure, it's tzaraas. You got to go outside. You move out of the camp. You have to live outside of polite society. You have to announce wherever you walk, I'm tummy, I'm impure. It's a long process. 7 days, plus 7 days, more 7 days. A whole elaborate way to purify yourself. It's a huge, huge hassle. Much easier solution is to just take a knife or go visit the dermatologist and cut it off. Get some stitches and move on. Don't ask. Don't tell. Don't pursue. Says the verse, be very careful with it. This is a sign of an underlying spiritual matter. This is not the problem. The problem is not the skin. The problem is what's beneath it. This is the symptom. Remember Miriam. She had a skin malady. She had tzaraas. But the reason why, the root cause of that malady was she spoke lashon hara. And that's why she was stricken with tzaraas. Don't treat the symptoms without addressing the disease. Address the fundamental root of the issue. Don't just simply skim off the surface. Oh, we have a manifestation of the problem. Let's remove it and ignore the cause of the issue. Instead, address the actual issue head on. Treat the illness. Understand the root of it. Don't simply paper over the symptoms. This is, of course, a very useful lesson for us. God forbid someone were to have a very serious health issue. So you could try to ignore it. Hope it'll go away. Pop an aspirin. Ease the symptoms and ignore the underlying issue. Don't go to the doctor. It's a hassle. You got to make an appointment. You got to call the insurance. Got to wait in the waiting room. It's invasive. It's uncomfortable. I'll just exercise the surface manifestation of the problem. That is a bad idea, and that can be disastrous. And the better approach is to try to find the root cause of the problem and try to fix it. 5 times in our Parsha. In Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 21, 22, verse 21, 22, verse 22, 22, verse 24, and 24, verse 7. 5 times in our Parsha, we read the imperative of bi'arta hara mikrebecha, to uproot, to eliminate, to purge the evil from your midst. And there's 5 times in our Parsha, and there's 5 other times in the book of Devarim. Well, we're told when there's evil, when there's a problem, when there's a flaw, when there's a malady, when there's an illness, eliminate it, purge it, uproot it, excise it from within. Don't cover up the external manifestations of it. Don't try to just chop off the skin level, the surface air manifestations of evil. Uproot it from within. Our Parsha ends with how we deal with Amalek. Amalek is a nation, a people, a force that's malignant, that's cancerous, and that can metastasize and can overtake and destroy everything. And we're told we have to eradicate the memory of Amalek, not just mow the lawn, as we're told Israel does sometimes with Hamas. No. You don't mow the lawn with Amalek. You don't just say, oh, it's not a problem. I don't see anything. Nothing going wrong. Everything seems to be fine. You have to uproot it. You have to eliminate every vestige, every memory of it. And that's with Amalek, but it's true with all flaws. If we're serious about growing and developing ourselves, this is the approach to eliminate the evil from within. And there's a contrast over here. We have the harlot. She has a guilty conscience. She's very uneasy about her chosen profession, and she wants to do something about it. She wants to wrestle with it and find some way to move forward. There's a way for her to address it that simply whitewashes it. I'll bring a sacrifice, and then I can do whatever I want. I can continue to do whatever I want without any guilty feeling. And the Torah says, no, that's not the way you go about addressing the evil within yourself. You have to eradicate it from your midst. Don't simply mask it. Don't simply make it palatable and just cover it over, but allow the evil to fester unmolested within you. Don't simply spray some deodorant to conceal the effluvious, malodorous stench while allowing the noxious corruption to stew unimpeded. If there's a whiff of mold that could be toxic, you could just spray some Febreze. I don't smell anything. I don't see anything. There's some asbestos. Okay, no big deal. Let's spray some deodorant. But one of those things that you plug into the wall that slowly releases the fumes, not the fumes, the perfume. Don't just cover up the surface and allow the noxious corruption to stew within unimpeded. There's an impulse to avoid addressing issues head on, to discover and to reckon with flaws. It's a painful and uncomfortable experience. And we have an instinct to just make it go away. Let me continue with my life. And our Parsha is exhorting us. Don't excise the tzaraas. Don't launder the money from your prostitution into the temple. Don't whitewash your sins. Just eliminate them from your view. Instead, cleanse them from within. And that, of course, is infinitely harder. But that is what the Torah wants of us. And as we learned, if the Torah expects this of us, it is, in fact, doable. So we have two examples in a Parsha of how not to do it. The harlot, she wants to clean her conscience, but she actually further exacerbates her sinfulness, further encourages sinfulness by just bringing a sacrifice. Look, I'm okay, I'm righteous. We have a man stricken with tzaraas and takes the do not ask, do not tell, do not pursue approach with his ailment. That's not the Torah's way. Instead, like Amalek, like those 5 verses, eliminate the evil from within. Take the much, much harder approach. It's much harder, but that's what's expected of us. But of course, I'm talking to myself because you are flawless. You're a beautiful human. What do you need to worry about? Flaw? No, well, all of us have some flaws. That's why we're here. If we were angels, we wouldn't need to be here. We wouldn't need to have the Torah. Angels don't need the Torah. The Torah was not given to the angels because the angels are flawless, or at least relatively flawless. We have the Torah precisely because we're flawed. And when we encounter our flaws, the prescription of the Torah is no half measures. Don't just take the scalpel and remove the flaw. Don't just find a way to make it palatable. Give the sacrifice to the temple. Don't spray the deodorant. Uncover the root cause, painful though it may be, and address it head on and work towards eliminating the root cause. Full measures not half measures. I appreciate your time. I appreciate that you listen to this edition of the Parsha podcast that I am recording from the Young Israel of Houston in the Daf Yomi room. I think it was fine. Did it sound any different? I think there's a little bit of an echo. I was worried there's a little bit of an echo in this room. So maybe the audio is not quite as pristine as we are used to. Was it okay? Was it tolerable? Did it live up to the standards of the Parsha podcast? Either way, let me know, rabbiwolberg.com. Have a wonderful day. Have a terrific, sensational, uplifting, and meaningful, and productive, and relaxing, and enjoyable Shabbos upcoming. Have a successful, meaningful, uplifting Elul. Have an elevating Elul. As I said, Elul is an acronym for elevating level upon level, one level after another after another. As we approach the high holidays, which are upcoming, and please God, with the infinite help of the Almighty, we'll gather again together next week around a cackling fire with some hot chocolate, or maybe a coffee, or maybe a Coke Zero, or maybe a seltzer, and we'll have another Parsha podcast with the help of the Almighty. And again, the email address is rabbiwolby@gmail.com.